The night sky had always been a mystery to humankind. For thousands of years, people looked upward and wondered if someone else was out there. They built myths, told stories, and later created machines to study the stars. But long before Earth had the power to send ships into the void, an event occurred that would change the fate of the species. An event that few remembered and even fewer believed. It began with silence. No one on Earth noticed the silent traveler moving through space. It was an asteroid larger than a mountain, heavy enough to wipe out every living creature. It came from the outer edges of the solar system, drifting closer with every passing day. Telescopes on Earth were still too weak to see it. Human scientists in that era were just learning how to send the first satellites into orbit. They were proud of their progress, but they did not know their home was in danger. Far away, a small alien expedition passed near Earth. The travelers belonged to a species called the Seraphim. They were not conquerors. They were explorers, gentle seekers of knowledge who visited young worlds and sometimes offered quiet help. When they saw Earth, they studied it carefully. They saw oceans filled with life, forests breathing under the sun, and cities filled with humans who worked, fought, dreamed, and built. The Seraphim admired the fire inside this fragile species. But then their sensors caught the shadow. The asteroid was on a direct path moving fast. If it struck, oceans would boil, skies would darken, and humankind would be gone before it even had the chance to grow. The Seraphim did not argue. They did not hesitate. They had the tools and they had the will, so they decided to act. Their ship, a quiet vessel hidden in the dark, released machines older than Earth's pyramids. These machines were massive drones that carried beams of directed energy. They fired again and again, shifting the asteroid's course little by little. It was dangerous work. The Seraphim had to keep their ship hidden while using technology that might burn out from strain. But they did not stop. Over weeks, they pushed the deadly rock until its path changed. The asteroid drifted harmlessly into the void, never touching Earth. On the surface, humans never knew. People carried on with their lives. They fought their wars, built their cities, and dreamed of the future. They had no idea that a hand from the stars had saved them. But not all traces of the rescue were erased. One of the Seraphim drones malfunctioned during the mission. It crashed into the ocean, sinking deep into the waters of the Pacific. Its beacon pulsed faintly, sending a message no human could understand. For centuries it lay forgotten. Generations passed. Humanity grew. They invented radios, airplanes, computers, and rockets. In time, they reached beyond the sky, placing machines in orbit and even walking on their moon. Yet the story of the Seraphim remained only as a whisper in old myths. Some old cultures spoke of shining ones who came from the stars and protected the Earth. Scientists dismissed these stories as fantasy, but myths often hold pieces of truth. Decades later, divers searching the ocean floor for minerals stumbled upon something strange. It was not stone. It was not coral. It was metal unlike anything known to Earth. They hauled it up, confused and curious. Scientists studied it in secret, realizing that it was far older and far more advanced than any human creation. It had symbols no one could read, circuits no one could explain, and at its heart it carried a small beacon that still flickered with alien code. Some believed it was a hoax. Others feared it was a weapon. Governments argued, fought, and eventually locked it away in hidden laboratories. But in the quiet halls of those labs, a few scientists began to believe in a different story. They looked at the patterns, the energy readings, the strange damage on its frame. Slowly, a theory formed. This machine was part of something greater. Perhaps long ago it had done something to protect the Earth. These whispers never reached the public. To most people, the Seraphim were still only a legend. But legends have power. Children told stories of star guardians. Writers spoke of visitors who once touched Earth. And hidden in the background, the truth waited. As the years turned into centuries, humanity spread into space. They built colonies on the Moon and Mars. They sent probes beyond the solar system. They looked to the stars with eager hearts. What they did not know was that the day would come when they would meet the Seraphim again, not as silent saviors, but as a broken people in need of help. And when that day arrived, the forgotten debt would rise once more. For now, however, the record of that first rescue remained buried in shadows. A single alien machine locked away in a secret vault carried the proof. Its faint beacon pulsed like a heartbeat, waiting for the day someone would understand it. Waiting for the day humanity would remember. The sky above Earth glittered with stars. Millions of humans looked upward every night, never realizing that they had once been saved by hands unseen. They thought themselves alone. They thought their history was their own. But the truth was far deeper, hidden in silence and memory. The Seraphim had passed by once. They had seen something worth saving. They had chosen life over indifference. And though humanity lived in ignorance of the gift, the universe itself remembered. The debt was not forgotten forever. It simply slept like a seed waiting to grow. Centuries passed since the forgotten rescue. Humanity grew bold and curious. Their ships carried them beyond their homeworld. They built colonies on new planets, some rich with resources, others harsh and empty. They sent explorers across the stars, planting flags, making alliances, and sometimes meeting danger. At first, the galaxy seemed too large for one young species. Empires stretched across the void, old and powerful, with fleets and histories that went back thousands of years. Many of them saw humanity as newcomers, a small flame in the vast night. But humans were not easily ignored. They adapted quickly, trading, learning, and finding ways to survive where others thought it impossible. It was during this age of expansion that the Seraphim appeared again. The first meeting happened at the edge of a quiet system near a dying sun. A human exploration ship entered orbit around a cracked planet, scanning for resources. What they found instead was a single alien craft, broken and barely holding together. Its signals were weak, its engines failing. The humans almost passed it by, but curiosity stopped them. They hailed the ship, and to their shock, the reply came in an ancient language. The same strange patterns found on the beacon hidden long ago on Earth. The captain of the human vessel remembered the old stories, the whispers of a rescue that no one could prove. He sent a message back to Earth. We may have found them. When the humans boarded the Seraphim ship, they found survivors, thin, weary, but alive. Their once bright eyes carried exhaustion. Their vessel was more like a lifeboat than a warship. They explained slowly and carefully who they were. They told of their history, how they once traveled freely among the stars, helping young civilizations grow. But those days were gone. The Seraphim were no longer respected. Other empires saw them as weak, old, and unworthy of influence. Their worlds were attacked by raiders. Their fleets were scattered. Their great cities, once full of art and wisdom, now struggled to feed their people. For centuries, they had been fading into silence, forgotten by most, but not by humans. When word reached Earth and the colonies, leaders debated fiercely. Some argued that humanity should not get involved. We have our own challenges, they said. Why carry the weight of another people's fall? Others disagreed. They remembered the recovered beacon, the myths, and the strange evidence hidden in secret labs. They remembered the idea that maybe long ago someone had saved Earth from a fate it could not escape. And then the decision came. Humanity would not turn away. The announcement was made on every colony and on Earth itself. Leaders stood together and spoke clearly. Long ago, when our species was small, the Seraphim acted to protect us. They did not ask for reward. They did not wait for thanks. Without them, we may not stand here today. Now we see them in their time of need. We will return the debt. The message spread across human space like fire. On every world, people felt pride. Soldiers, engineers, scientists, and even farmers volunteered to help. It was not conquest. It was not charity. It was something deeper. A choice to repay a kindness that had once been given freely. Human fleets began to move. Not to invade, but to escort. Ships filled with supplies traveled across dangerous routes carrying food, medicine, and tools to Seraphim colonies. Engineers worked beside Seraphim builders to repair broken power grids. Doctors combined alien and human knowledge to fight strange diseases that had long plagued Seraphim children. Farmers from Earth and Mars brought seeds and soil technology, teaching the Seraphim how to grow new crops even in poor ground. The Seraphim at first were silent. They did not understand. For centuries they had been ignored or used by others. To them, the galaxy was a place where power ruled and kindness was weakness. But humans came with open hands, not to take, but to give. Slowly, the Seraphim began to trust again. In quiet halls, old Seraphim leaders whispered, "Why do they do this? Why help us?" And the answer came from a young human diplomat. "Because once when we were weak, you helped us. You may have forgotten, but we remember." The words carried across the stars. The Seraphim felt something they thought had been lost. Hope. Not everyone was pleased. Other empires watched with suspicion. They saw humanity's actions as strange, even dangerous. Why waste resources on a dying race? Why protect those who could not defend themselves? To them, strength was measured in control. They could not understand a species that measured strength in gratitude, but humans did not care for the doubts of empires. They worked side by side with the Seraphim, repairing, building, defending. And with each act, the bond grew stronger. On one Seraphim world, a great city lay half-ruined. Its towers leaned, its streets cracked, its people surviving on little. Human engineers arrived, carrying machines and determination. They built water systems, cleared rubble, and restored power. Children of the Seraphim watched as lights returned to their homes. For the first time in their short lives, they saw their parents smile with pride instead of fear. On another world, Seraphim farmers struggled to grow food in poisoned soil. Human colonists shared hardy crops bred on Mars, plants that grew even in dust and thin air. They showed how to build domes, recycle water, and feed growing families. Soon green fields stretched where only gray dust had been, and in the sky above, human fleets began to patrol, not as conquerors, but as guardians. Raiders who once preyed on the Seraphim found themselves facing unexpected resistance. Small human ships, fast and unpredictable, fought with tactics no empire had seen before. The Seraphim, watching these battles, began to fight alongside them, relearning courage from their strange allies. Slowly, the Seraphim culture awoke. Artists painted again. Scholars returned to their libraries. Children laughed without fear of hunger. And always, in every city and every ship, one truth was spoken. The humans remember. The humans repay, the galaxy noticed. Rumors spread from world to world. Some said humanity was foolish. Others whispered that maybe, just maybe, they were something different, something dangerous in their own way. For kindness, when shown with strength, could reshape the balance of stars, and as the Seraphim looked to the future, they no longer saw only despair. They saw ships beside them, hands reaching to lift them, and allies who owed nothing but gave everything. For the first time in centuries, they believed they might rise again. The forgotten rescue was no longer forgotten. It had returned not as a myth, but as living proof. Humanity had remembered the debt, and in remembering, they had changed the course of two species forever. The galaxy, watching silently, had no idea how far this choice would reach. The bond between humanity and the Seraphim grew stronger with each passing year. What began as a promise of gratitude slowly became something greater. Both species were changing, not by conquest, not by fear, but by trust and cooperation. The Seraphim had once been a proud people. Their starships had traveled the galaxy when humanity was still learning how to build stone houses. But centuries of decline left them broken and weary. When humans arrived with open hands, many Seraphim expected disappointment. They thought humans would leave after a short time or demand payment. Yet humans did not act like the other empires. Instead, they gave gifts not of gold or treasure, but of knowledge, effort, and hope. It began with technology. Human engineers studied the Seraphim's failing machines. Their reactors flickered with unstable power. Their ships, once elegant, now creaked with age. Human minds, known for problem-solving and creativity, began to adapt what they saw. Where alien systems were too complex, humans built simpler replacements. Where circuits had burned out, humans designed new ones using their own methods. One Seraphim elder stood in silence as she watched a group of young human engineers rebuild an ancient reactor core. Her people had tried for decades to fix it, but always failed. The humans, with their strange ideas, used recycled materials, spare parts from their own ships, and even tools designed for completely different machines. Yet somehow the reactor hummed back to life. For the Seraphim, it was a miracle. For the humans, it was just another problem solved. Doctors followed next. The Seraphim had long suffered from illnesses caused by their weakened worlds. Their own medicine had grown outdated, their records lost during centuries of decline. Human doctors came with curiosity and patience. They studied Seraphim biology, compared it with Earth's knowledge, and created treatments that neither species could have made alone. On one Seraphim colony, a disease had spread for generations. It left children weak, their lives cut short. Seraphim parents mourned quietly, believing there was no cure, but human doctors refused to accept that. They studied night and day, tested carefully, and finally combined Earth's genetic science with Seraphim healing traditions. The result was a simple treatment, one that could be grown from plants and shared easily. For the first time in centuries, seraphim children played without fear. Their laughter filled the air, a sound not heard in generations. Farmers, too, brought gifts. Human colonists from Mars and Earth knew the struggle of harsh soil. They had learned to grow crops in deserts, on rocky moons, and even in domes under thin atmospheres. When they looked at the seraphim's starving worlds, they saw opportunity, not despair. They shared seeds bred for survival, taught new methods of irrigation, and showed how to recycle waste into fertile ground. Soon, fields of green stretched across dusty plains. Families who once ate little now shared meals filled with color and strength. The seraphim began to realize something. Humans were not simply helping, they were teaching. Every gift came with knowledge, and that knowledge stayed. The seraphim were not being made dependent. They were being lifted back onto their feet. Humanity was not trying to own them, but to remind them of their own strength. And then there were the soldiers. The galaxy was not kind. Raiders and hostile empires saw the seraphim as weak, easy prey. When they noticed humans protecting them, many assumed the newcomers would falter. But they did not understand human ways of war. Humans were smaller, their fleets less advanced than those of the ancient empires. Yet they were unpredictable. Where other species relied on centuries-old strategies, humans adapted. They used ambushes, decoys, and bold risks. A small human ship could outmaneuver a larger foe by thinking differently. They were willing to lose battles if it meant winning the war. The seraphim watched in awe. They had once been warriors themselves, but despair had dulled their courage. Fighting beside humans, they began to feel the old fire again. They learned new tactics mixed with their own traditions and slowly rebuilt their defenses. For the first time in centuries, seraphim fleets began to patrol their own skies with pride. In every field, science, medicine, farming, defense, humanity gave gifts. Not because they expected repayment, but because they believed it was right. Yet still the seraphim asked the same question. Why? Why would a young species still rising give so much to an older race that had already fallen? Why risk fleets, lives, and resources for people who could offer little in return? The answer came in many forms. A soldier said, "Because once you shielded us, now we shield you." A doctor said, "Because life should not be wasted, not yours, not ours." An engineer said, "Because solving problems is what we do." And finally, a child from Earth visiting with her parents said simply, "Because friends help friends." The seraphim wept at these words. They had lived so long believing the galaxy was only full of greed and power. But here was a species that measured value not in wealth but in loyalty. The galaxy, however, was unsettled. Other empires whispered in their courts. Some claimed humans were clever manipulators, using kindness as a weapon to gain influence. Others scoffed, saying the seraphim were not worth saving and humans would regret wasting time. But a few quietly began to watch with interest. They wondered if humanity was building something new, something no empire had tried before. A bond of trust strong enough to reshape the stars. As the years went on, the seraphim changed. Cities once filled with silence now echoed with music and debate. Schools opened again with both seraphim and human teachers. Libraries grew, filled with old wisdom and new discoveries. Families once hopeless dreamed again of futures where their children could explore, build and live without fear. And in every corner of seraphim space, one truth was spoken. Humanity has given us more than tools or ships. They have given us ourselves. The forgotten rescue was no longer a myth. It was alive, breathing in the actions of a species that refused to forget kindness. The debt had been remembered. The debt had been repaid, not with gold, not with power, but with gifts that restored dignity and hope. But the galaxy is never still. Not all welcomed this new friendship. In the distance, hostile powers watched with growing unease. They saw two peoples rising together where there had once been weakness. They saw strength being forged in the fires of gratitude and loyalty. And to those who thrived on domination, it was a dangerous thing. Storms were coming. The seraphim and the humans would soon be tested not by hunger or broken machines, but by enemies who could not understand why kindness made them strong. For now, however, the seraphim looked upon the humans with gratitude beyond words. The stars no longer felt cold. The darkness no longer felt endless. Together they had lit a flame that could not be ignored, and that flame, born from an old forgotten rescue, was only growing brighter. The galaxy was watching. Rumors of human kindness and seraphim recovery spread quietly across star systems. Some empires were skeptical, some curious and others openly hostile. They had learned long ago that weakness invited attack, and the Seraphim's resurgence backed by humans appeared too sudden, too bold. It started with small strikes. Raiders attacked the outskirts of Seraphim colonies looking for easy prey. They thought humanity's fleets were slow, inexperienced, and predictable. But humans did not fight like other species. They adapted, improvising strategies no enemy could anticipate. A small convoy would appear where none was expected. Ships would scatter in unusual patterns, and yet the Seraphim and humans would emerge victorious. Sometimes without firing a shot, the Seraphim watched in awe. They had known war, but never like this. Humans seemed to turn danger into opportunity, using creativity and unpredictability as weapons. Children in the streets of Seraphim cities whispered about the strange new tactics. Elders studied them with a mixture of fear and admiration. Humanity's courage was contagious. And then the major threat came. A hostile empire, long suspicious of the humans' motives, sent a fleet to test the alliance. Their ships were massive, bristling with weapons and shields, their crews seasoned in conquest. They expected the Seraphim to surrender quickly, and the humans to flee. They could not have been more wrong. The first contact was tense. A lone human cruiser, smaller and seemingly weaker, approached the lead ship of the invaders. Sensors blinked as officers aboard the hostile vessel tried to predict human movements. They could not. Humans split their ships into multiple groups, each taking independent actions. The Seraphim, once timid, now followed orders with precision, their old tactics renewed and blended with human ingenuity. The battle began not with weapons, but with strategy. Human captains used decoys, sending empty vessels toward the enemy while their main fleet circled. They disrupted communications, jammed sensors, and exploited weaknesses the invaders had overlooked. It was chaotic, unpredictable, and brilliantly effective. From orbit, Seraphim civilians watched in fear and fascination. Smoke and explosions lit the skies, yet human voices and commands rang clear across comms channels. Calm and determined, Seraphim pilots learned quickly, following the humans' example, daring maneuvers that would have seemed reckless months before. And in the midst of it all, humans never stopped protecting their allies. They risked themselves to shield Seraphim ships, creating opportunities where none existed. By the time the battle ended, the enemy fleet had retreated. They had underestimated humans, and they had underestimated Seraphim courage. For the first time in generations, the Seraphim felt pride. Their fleets had fought alongside humans, not as subordinates, but as equals. And the humans, though victorious, showed no desire to claim glory. Their reward was the safety of their friends, the knowledge that their help had mattered. In the days after, humans and Seraphim worked together to repair damaged cities, rebuild fleets, and care for the injured. But the battle had left its mark. Both species understood that this was only the beginning. The galaxy was not always kind to those who chose compassion over conquest. New threats could come from anywhere, and they would need to stand together. It was in these moments that deeper bonds formed. Soldiers who had fought side by side shared stories of their homes, of Earth and Mars, of Seraphim cities and traditions. They discovered that despite differences, there was much in common: courage, hope, loyalty, and the desire to protect those who could not protect themselves. In quiet moments, young Seraphim children would sit with human engineers, learning to repair small machines or build simple tools. The children laughed at mistakes, shared ideas, and dreamed without fear. And for the first time in centuries, the elders watched without worry. The next generation would be stronger, wiser, and braver, thanks to both species. Not all victories were grand. Some were small and personal. A human medic worked tirelessly to heal a Seraphim child injured in a raid. Days passed, nights were long, but the child survived and the family wept with gratitude. A group of human farmers stayed behind to help Seraphim communities recover after fields were burned, teaching techniques to prevent future disasters. Each act, no matter how small, strengthened the alliance. One human commander observing the cooperation said quietly to a Seraphim officer, "This is what makes us strong. Not our ships, not our weapons, but our willingness to fight for each other." The Seraphim nodded, understanding for the first time that their old pride, when combined with human loyalty, was a force no enemy could easily defeat. The alliance also changed the Seraphim's culture. Once hesitant to celebrate, they now held festivals of gratitude marking the bond with humans. Music, art, and storytelling returned to cities that had long been silent. Human artists joined, blending styles, creating works that symbolized hope, unity, and the strength of friendship. The sky above their worlds lit with fireworks, laughter, and lights, a message to the galaxy that two peoples had chosen solidarity over fear. Yet the threat of hostile empires lingered. Across distant star systems, spies and scouts reported the unusual alliance. Some envoys came to study humanity, curious about why this species helped others so willingly. Others plotted ways to undermine the growing bond, fearing a power they could not yet measure. But the humans and Seraphim remained vigilant, learning from each other and preparing for the challenges ahead. The turning point came when a massive raider fleet attacked a Seraphim mining colony. The humans, outnumbered and outgunned, arrived just in time, but instead of relying on brute force, they used creativity. They guided the Seraphim miners to build clever traps and decoys. Explosions were controlled, hulls were shielded, and in a series of unexpected maneuvers, the raiders were defeated with minimal loss. Afterward, a Seraphim officer approached a human captain. "We have forgotten what it is to fight with honor and courage," he said. "You remind us." The captain smiled. "No," she replied, "you have always known. We just help you remember." By the end of the campaign, the Seraphim were no longer a broken people. They were allies, partners, and friends. Humanity had given them more than supplies and weapons. They had given them confidence, hope, and a reason to believe in their own strength again. In the quiet after the storms of war, both species looked to the future. Together they could explore new worlds, recover lost knowledge, and protect those who could not protect themselves. And though the galaxy watched with suspicion, a new message traveled through space. Two peoples united by gratitude and loyalty are stronger than any empire alone. The fires of battle had forged bonds that could not be broken. From the ruins of the Seraphim's decline, a new strength emerged, one built on courage, trust, and the enduring power of repayment. For humans, it was not about glory. It was about keeping a promise. And for the Seraphim, it was not about debt. It was about rediscovering themselves through the gift of friendship that had been given and returned in ways that changed everything. The galaxy would remember. The stars had grown quiet after the last battle, but humanity and the Seraphim knew that silence did not mean peace. Across the galaxy, distant empires and hidden powers still watched, some curious, some suspicious, and some openly hostile. Yet the bond between humans and the Seraphim had grown stronger than any fleet, stronger than any weapon. It was a bond forged in gratitude, courage, and shared purpose. Human leaders met with Seraphim elders in council chambers orbiting a newly rebuilt world. The walls of the chamber gleamed with the light of distant stars, and the air buzzed with anticipation. Together they planned the next phase, not of war but of renewal. The humans insisted that this time the Seraphim lead. They offered advice, guidance, and resources, but never command. Engineers, farmers, and doctors were sent to rebuild Seraphim cities, but they left the designs and decisions to the locals. Ships were repaired with human technology, but the crews were Seraphim, trained by humans but allowed to grow in their own ways. The message was clear. Humanity did not want control, only partnership. Across the colonies, humans continued their work quietly. They brought knowledge, but they also listened. They asked the Seraphim about traditions, beliefs, and customs that humans had only glimpsed in records and legends. Together, they created schools, museums, and libraries, blending human and Seraphim culture. Children learned both languages, both histories, and both ways of thinking. It was a generation that would grow up knowing unity instead of fear, trust instead of suspicion. The Seraphim had begun to dream again. They rebuilt cities that had lain in ruins for centuries. Markets once empty now buzzed with activity. Artisans, inspired by humans and their own traditions, created sculptures, music, and paintings that told stories of survival and friendship. They celebrated not only life but the bonds that made life possible, and humans did not stop at rebuilding. They explored further than they ever had before, discovering distant star systems and new resources. When they found planets that could support life, they did not claim them for themselves. Instead, they shared them with the Seraphim and other species in need. Humanity's idea of repayment had grown larger than anyone could have imagined. It was not just a debt. It was a promise to protect life wherever it could flourish. the galaxy began to notice. Distant observers who had once doubted or mocked human actions began to watch with interest. How could a species so young, with such limited resources, create loyalty without fear or domination? How could kindness become power? Some envoys traveled to witness for themselves, and they returned with reports of cities restored, fleets rebuilt, and alliances strengthened. Slowly, whispers spread. Humanity was different, and that difference could change everything. But not all reactions were peaceful. A coalition of empires who relied on fear to maintain control began to see humans as a threat. They did not understand that the human strength came from trust, cooperation, and courage, not greed or conquest. They sent envoys with warnings, then fleets with ultimatums, and finally fleets with weapons. They expected humans and the Seraphim to crumble under the pressure. The humans did not panic. They did not fight for power nor for glory. They fought to protect life and to honor a promise made long ago. Human and Seraphim fleets moved together, not as master and servant, but as equals. Battles erupted across star systems, but even in the chaos, the alliance remained organized, creative, and resilient. Human strategy was unpredictable, blending creativity and boldness. They diverted fleets where enemies expected none, struck with small forces that seemed weak but achieved decisive results, and used their knowledge of new worlds to create defensive advantages. The Seraphim, once cautious and hesitant, now moved with confidence, following humans' example but also contributing their own traditions and tactics. Together, they turned every attack into a lesson, every challenge into opportunity. The galaxy watched in disbelief. Victory did not come from destruction alone. It came from preparation, cooperation, and the will to defend life rather than conquer it. Slowly, the narrative of what power meant began to shift. Other species began to see that strength could be measured in loyalty, trust, and courage, not just fleets and weapons. On the ground, humanity continued its work. Cities were rebuilt, crops planted, and hospitals opened. Young Seraphim trained alongside human engineers, learning techniques that combined both species' knowledge. They repaired machines that had been broken for centuries, explored ruins to recover lost knowledge, and shared ideas openly. Humanity's gift was not just in material resources. It was in teaching the Seraphim to stand on their own while standing together. In one corner of a newly rebuilt city, an elderly Seraphim teacher watched as human and Seraphim children played together, sharing games, stories, and inventions. She had lived through the dark years when hope had almost vanished. Now she whispered quietly, "They gave us more than life. They gave us ourselves." The final test came when a coalition of hostile fleets attacked a vital Seraphim trade route. It was the largest challenge humanity and the Seraphim had faced together. The humans were outnumbered, the Seraphim weary, and the stakes higher than ever. But instead of retreating, they coordinated their efforts. Human ingenuity and Seraphim experience combined to create strategies that no single species could have executed alone. They used decoys, misdirection, and rapid repairs mid-battle. Small human teams infiltrated enemy ships to disable systems. Seraphim pilots used their knowledge of the stars to create traps in asteroid fields and nebulae. Every action was calculated not to destroy recklessly but to protect life. By the time the battle ended, the coalition fleets were defeated or forced to retreat. Human and Seraphim losses were minimal, yet their victory was total. Afterward, both species celebrated. But there was no boastful triumph. Instead, there was quiet reflection. The humans had returned the debt of a forgotten rescue centuries ago. The Seraphim had rediscovered their pride, their strength, and their hope. Together they had proven that gratitude, courage, and loyalty could change not only lives but the entire course of history. Word of the victory spread across the galaxy. Species who had once doubted humanity began to reconsider their assumptions. A new idea took root, that a species could rise not by dominating others but by helping them, by inspiring loyalty and trust. It was a radical concept, one that would influence politics, culture, and exploration for generations. In council chambers, human leaders spoke to Seraphim elders. "We did not come to take or to rule. We came to remember a promise, and now together we have shown the galaxy what can happen when trust guides power." The elders nodded. They understood that this was not the end but the beginning of a new era. The debt had been repaid, but the alliance it created would shape the stars for centuries. Across rebuilt worlds, celebrations were held. Music, art, and laughter filled streets that had been silent for decades. Children of both species ran and played together. Scholars taught the lessons of cooperation and courage. Engineers designed the ships and cities of tomorrow. And in every heart, one truth remained. Kindness, when matched with courage, is a force no enemy can ignore. The galaxy itself seemed to shift. Empires began to rethink old assumptions. Traders and explorers took note. Even distant civilizations, previously indifferent, observed humans and the Seraphim as examples of what could be achieved when life was valued above conquest. And in the quiet moments, humans and Seraphim would look up at the stars and remember the past. They remembered the forgotten rescue, the long journey from despair to hope, and the promise that had carried across centuries. They understood that one act of kindness, one gesture of help, could ripple through time and change everything. The debt had been repaid. But in doing so, humanity had given the galaxy something far greater than a simple obligation. They had given it hope, unity, and a new way to measure true strength. As ships departed for distant worlds, children waved from rebuilt cities and elders watched with pride. A single truth resonated across all planets. We are stronger together. We rise by lifting others, and we protect what matters most: life, friendship, and courage. And so the stars themselves seemed to shine brighter. The story of a forgotten rescue, remembered centuries later, became legend not of conquest, but of humanity's gift, the power of loyalty, and the enduring debt repaid in ways that changed everything. The galaxy had learned a new lesson. Kindness is strength. Courage is contagious, and when humanity chooses to act, even the oldest debts can inspire the brightest future. Humanity and the Seraphim looked to tomorrow, knowing that together, they could face whatever the universe might bring. And for the first time, the stars did not feel distant or cold, they felt like home.